Her son slammed the car door into her shoulder and muttered, "You're lucky we even brought you." Nancy Reynolds, 72, didn't argue. She went quiet, dead quiet. That night, she pulled out the house deed, the bank records, and started erasing him. By morning, his name was gone from everything she once shared. She had raised him, protected him, trusted him. Now she'd bury his entitlement in court, with receipts. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The chill hung low that morning, one of those wind-bitten Sundays where the sun looked warm but lied. Nancy tugged her cardigan tighter as she stepped down the last concrete step outside the church. Her knees didn't bend so much as groan. Brian stood next to the car, already drumming his fingers on the roof. "Come on, Mom," he called without turning around. "We don't have all day." She offered a polite nod to Reverend Halloway as she passed him, gripping the edge of the car door to steady herself. Her fingers barely found the inside handle when the door jolted forward. Wham! The heavy metal edge caught her square in the shoulder. A gasp slipped out before she could bite it down. The sharp jolt turned to a throb that traveled down her arm like a warning. "Oh my God, are you serious?" Michelle's voice curled around the air from the passenger seat. "She's fine. You barely touched her." Brian didn't even look at her. He muttered, almost under his breath, "You're lucky we even brought you." Nancy eased into the back seat like someone folding a letter they didn't want to send. She said nothing, not when Michelle blasted the heat too high for comfort, not when Brian took the corner near Elm too fast and made her shoulder bump the window, and certainly not when they pulled into the Olive Garden like it was a treat, not the weekly obligation it had become. Lunch was tight smiles and limp breadsticks. Michelle took selfies of her manicured nails wrapped around a wine glass, while Brian scrolled through his phone, occasionally grunting at the menu like it was an offense to his time. No one asked Nancy what she wanted. They just ordered the usual for her, fettuccine alfredo with the sauce on the side, which never actually came that way. She cut the pasta into small pieces, not out of frailty, but because it gave her something to do, something to control. She chewed slowly, counted the ceiling tiles, wondered briefly what would happen if she just stood up and left. Back at the house, a Craftsman-style two-story she'd loved before it stopped feeling like hers, Brian rushed in ahead to catch the end of the game. Michelle went straight upstairs to rest her nerves. Nancy paused at the door, letting her eyes roam over the foyer. Once there'd been a woven rug there, navy blue, with white lattice. Now it was a greige runner Michelle bought online. To match the updated vibe, most of the framed photos had vanished too, replaced by abstract prints with gold foil streaks. Nothing had her handwriting on it anymore. Upstairs a door slammed, not at her, not about her, but in her house. She didn't go to the guest room, her room now, if she were being honest. Instead, Nancy walked softly to the linen closet at the end of the hall. She reached behind the spare pillows, fingers tracing the familiar ridges of cedar. The chest was still there, hidden like a secret no one ever asked about. Kneeling hurt. She did it anyway. The hinges creaked softly as she lifted the lid. Inside, the smell of lavender sachets and decades past. She moved aside old birthday cards, a crocheted baby cap, a folded church bulletin from 1983, until her fingers found the manila envelope, the deed, the real one. Her name in crisp typeface, black ink on thick cream paper. Just hers. No co-signers, no shared titles, no Brian, no Michelle. She held it like scripture. Standing now, she felt the weight of something ancient slide off her shoulders. It wasn't just about the slam. It hadn't been for a long time. But that was the moment, the sharpness of it, the casual cruelty, that finally made her see it clearly. Nancy looked up at the ceiling. Her voice was low, but it didn't shake. Enough. She slid the deed into her purse and zipped it closed. It made a sound like a seal being broken. And somewhere downstairs the game went on, Brian shouting at a team that didn't know his name. The wind rattled dry leaves across the sidewalk as Nancy stepped out of the lift, clutching her handbag like it held a living thing. The law office stood in a modest brick building nestled between a dentist's office and a shuttered shoe repair shop. Clean windows, navy awning, safe. Inside, the receptionist offered her tea and a clipboard, but Nancy just smiled and said, "I'm expected." Her voice had the polite chill of a woman who'd decided not to be underestimated anymore. Laura Kessler's office looked exactly as Nancy remembered. Soft gray walls, a mahogany desk too neat to be casual, and a lamp that gave off a warm, unbothered light. Laura rose when Nancy entered, smoothing the sleeves of her blazer. "Nancy, it's good to see you," she said. "I got your message. Sounded urgent." "It is," Nancy replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Do you remember the property paperwork we filed after my surgery last spring?" Laura nodded, already reaching for her keyboard. "When you added your son to the deed, correct? For emergency access, I believe you said." Nancy's lips twitched, but no smile followed. "That was the reason I gave. The truth is, he and his wife moved in to help, and then they never left. At first it was meals and laundry and rest while you heal, Mom. But now, I pay the bills. They live like squatters with access to a wine fridge." Laura blinked once, then turned fully to the screen. Her nails clicked as she pulled up the document. "Let's take a look." Nancy watched her read, saw the slight tension form in the attorney's jaw. "There it is," Laura muttered. "You're listed as joint tenant with right of survivorship. That means, should anything happen to you, the house automatically becomes Brian's," Nancy finished, "and Michelle's by extension." Laura nodded grimly. "And unless Michelle was added separately, she's not on this title. Let me check." More typing. Then a short, satisfied exhale. "Nope, it's just you and Brian. No amendment or secondary filing." Nancy sat back, a slow warmth rising behind her ribs. Not comfort, but something more dangerous. Possibility. "Tell me what I can do," she said quietly. Laura looked at her with that measured lawyer's gaze, the one that balanced realism with a spark of strategy. "We move the property into a revocable living trust. We file a quiet title action to resolve any ambiguity in your ownership. That gives you legal control and keeps it out of probate. It doesn't erase the past deed, but it can damn well reclaim the present. And if Brian contests? Then we have a case, especially if he never financially contributed. Do you have records?" Nancy pulled a thick envelope from her purse and placed it on the desk like a chess piece. "Every mortgage payment, every repair, every property tax." Laura allowed herself a half smile. "You've always been tidy, Nancy." "Not always," she replied, her voice tightening. "Just, no one was watching closely before." There was a long pause. Laura folded her hands. "We can start drafting today. You'll have to move quickly. If they get wind of this, they might try to cloud the title or move money around." "Let them try," Nancy said. She leaned forward slightly, her voice sharpening like a blade drawn slow. "Let's make this house mine again, on paper and in practice." The heater kicked on with a metallic rattle. Outside the window, a dog barked once and was silenced. Laura turned to her computer. "Then we begin." Nancy's eyes drifted to a framed photo on Laura's bookshelf. Two women laughing in ski jackets, cheeks flushed. A mother and daughter. Trust and respect in a single still. She looked away. Down in the building's garage, her lift idled, unaware. In the glove box upstairs in her house, Brian had stored all the old spare keys. She would need to change the locks soon. 9 months. Nancy stared at the microwave clock blinking 3:17 a.m. in soft, stubborn green. She hadn't been able to sleep. Again. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only thing she didn't mind hearing at this hour. Everything else in the house made her feel like a trespasser. She sat at the kitchen island, if you could still call it hers, with a cooling mug of peppermint tea and her thoughts. 9 months since the knee surgery. 9 months since the first night Brian and Michelle wheeled her suitcase into the guest room with matching, exaggerated smiles. "We'll be close to help you recover, Mom," Michelle had said brightly, setting a silk robe on the twin bed like it was a gift. "And the master's closer to the laundry, so it just makes sense." Nancy had nodded at the time, numbed by painkillers and the anesthesia still fogging her edges. But she remembered now. Every shift in tone, every small reallocation of space, dignity, and control. By the third week, the hallway thermostat was off limits. Brian had caught her adjusting it once, just by 2 degrees, and told her, "Michelle runs cold and energy costs are crazy. You'll get used to it." The fourth week, Nancy noticed labels in the fridge, not just for organization, but control. Michelle's meal prep, do not touch, Brian's protein shakes. Her own items were pushed to one narrow shelf in the door, like a guest trying not to overstay. They'd scheduled her kitchen time like she was a tenant in a boarding house. Michelle had posted a printed list on the fridge under the guise of routine for your recovery, but it was never temporary. That list never left. By the 6th month, Michelle didn't even feign sweetness anymore. "You sure you're not confusing the salt and sugar again?" she'd ask, inspecting Nancy's mashed potatoes like a school project she expected to fail. "Just trying to help." Brian's jokes began shifting too. Every time a neighbor visited, or one of his old high school buddies dropped by, he'd laugh too loudly and say things like, "Yeah, our tenant's still doing all right in the back room." Nancy had forced a chuckle the first time, not the second. By the 5th, she stopped pretending. Now, under the sterile glow of the kitchen light, she opened her notebook. A page of scrawled account numbers stared back. Next to each, dates, balances, notes. She flipped to a sticky note Laura had handed her before she left the office. "If any accounts are co-linked, shut them down now, quietly." She pulled her laptop close, cracked open the screen, and typed in the bank's website. Her password came back to her instantly, like muscle memory trained by necessity, not routine. The first account popped up. Joint Savings. Brian's name sat right beside hers like a silent thief. With careful precision, she navigated to the options menu. Close account. Confirm. Redirect funds. Next, the checking account. Then, the utility autopay. Every financial artery they had leached from her, Nancy cut off one by one. She moved the remaining balances into a new trust-designated account Laura had helped her open that afternoon, one without Brian's fingerprints. As she waited for the final transfer to process, Nancy leaned back and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for months. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was something sturdier than fear. She looked around the kitchen. The marble backsplash Michelle had insisted on, the fancy espresso machine no one had taught her to use, the empty wine bottles staged like decor on the windowsill. Not a single item had been chosen with her in mind. Nancy stood and placed her empty mug in the sink. She didn't wash it. She left it there, rim stained, peppermint scent fading. When she reached her bedroom door, she paused. The hallway creaked behind her, a whisper of sound. Just enough to know she wasn't the only one awake. The invoice was printed on glossy cardstock, unnecessarily thick, like they wanted it to feel expensive just to touch. Nancy found it on the counter next to an empty cereal bowl and a half-folded dish towel. The letterhead read Oak and Ash Interiors, and beneath it a list of charges: new quartz countertops, bathroom retiling, luxury vinyl flooring for primary suite. The total came to more than Nancy's first year of mortgage payments back in 1986. There was no mention of her name, just Brian's messy scrawl in the bottom right corner under a signature line labeled Homeowner Authorization. She read it twice, then once more. Nancy didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply took out her phone and snapped photos of the invoice from 3 angles. Then she checked the drawer where Michelle stored unopened mail in a careless stack. There were 2 more estimates buried beneath an expired coupon flyer, all addressed to Brian Reynolds, none of them addressed to her. She photographed those too. Later that afternoon, Nancy found Brian in the living room, half reclined with his feet on her antique coffee table, watching some renovation show with the volume too loud. She stood just inside the doorway, holding the invoice loosely by her side like a forgotten grocery list. "Brian," she said, calm, controlled. He muted the TV but didn't look up. "Yeah? Did you authorize a remodel loan?" He blinked. "Oh, that. Michelle handled most of it. We figured you'd be fine with it." "You figured I'd be fine with 5-figure renovations taken against my home?" He finally glanced over, eyebrows slightly lifted as if she'd asked about the weather. "Mom, it's not like you're using the master bath, and Michelle wanted to modernize it. It's an investment." Nancy didn't reply, just nodded once. Brian returned to his show like the matter was closed. Michelle walked in from the hallway, holding a roll of painter's tape. "Did you see the new swatches I ordered for the accent wall? The sage green is going to open up that room, not that you ever go in there." Nancy's eyes lingered on Michelle's nails, freshly done again, this time in a shade that matched the swatches. "No," she said softly, "I don't go in there anymore." And then she turned, walked upstairs, and shut the door to her room with a gentleness that said, "Watch me." That evening, Nancy forwarded the photos to Laura with the subject line, "Loan authorization. No consent given." Laura replied less than an hour later, "Perfect. We've got leverage. The forgery will play well in quiet title action. I'll move forward with evidence submission. Just need your sign-off." Nancy tapped her screen once, then again. Permission granted. 2 words, but they felt like lighting a fuse. She waited until Thursday morning to rent the storage unit, drove herself in her beige Camry that Brian assumed was still out of commission. She picked a facility on the outskirts of town, climate-controlled, secure, anonymous. The woman at the front desk reminded Nancy of her old friend Marlene from church. Kind eyes, smart mouth. Took her under 10 minutes to set it all up. That night, Nancy began moving her most personal items in quiet increments: jewelry, family photos, her father's war medals, the recipe box with her mother's handwriting faded on index cards. Even her late husband's cufflinks, which hadn't been touched since the funeral, were carefully wrapped in a sock and placed inside her purse. She took nothing they would notice. Not yet. Just the irreplaceables. On Friday, Laura emailed again. The paperwork was underway. Michelle's forged signature on the remodel invoice had been accepted as preliminary evidence of overreach and potential fraud. "This will give us momentum in court," Laura had written. "She tried to build over your name. Now we use it to carve hers off." Nancy stared at that last line, rereading it as thunder rolled in the distance. Downstairs, Michelle argued with Brian over the wrong paint finish. Their voices rose and fell like bad music. Shrill, discordant, impossible to ignore. Nancy placed the cufflinks in the storage box and shut the lid. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Nancy found it tucked between a Bed Bath & Beyond catalog and the gas bill, the legal watermark ghosting through the cream paper before she even opened it. Return address, M. Halverson, attorney at law. Inside, 2 neatly folded documents and a cover letter titled Petition for Emergency Injunctive Relief. She read the first sentence twice before sitting down. Michelle Reynolds alleges that Nancy Reynolds, her mother-in-law and former homeowner, has begun a pattern of coercive behavior to reclaim a residence that was mutually shared and modified under good faith. Nancy blinked slowly. A faint numbness crept up her fingertips as she flipped the page. Michelle was claiming elder instability, said Nancy had been emotionally volatile, increasingly paranoid, and repeatedly threatened to lock them out. The phrasing was carefully cruel, slick, like someone had coached her on how to wield sympathy like a scalpel. Nancy's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. Instead, she walked to the fireplace mantel, grabbed her reading glasses, and pulled out her phone. She called Laura. "They're going to try to make me the villain," she said, "and they're not even subtle about it." Laura exhaled through the line. "Good. Let them underestimate you." The courtroom was too cold and too beige. Michelle wore an ash-gray wrap dress and a somber expression. Beside her, her attorney, a young man with over-gelled hair and a moral flexibility Nancy could smell from the gallery, adjusted his tie and whispered something in her ear. Brian sat behind them, jaw clenched, staring down at his shoes like a teenager outside the principal's office. Nancy and Laura took their seats at the other table. Nancy had dressed with intent, navy wool coat, hair neatly pinned, wedding band still on, though she no longer wore it daily. Respectable, present, sharp. Judge O'Connor reviewed the paperwork with a pair of reading glasses he kept sliding down his nose. Michelle's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, this is a case of elder mismanagement turned hostile. My client and her husband have lived in the home for nearly a year, providing care and companionship. only to be suddenly threatened with eviction and stripped of access to areas of the house they helped renovate with personal funds. Personal funds? Laura stood slowly. May I approach? The judge waved her forward. She handed him a manila folder, copies of mortgage statements, property tax records, maintenance receipts, all with Nancy's name, every last one. My client has been the sole financial contributor to the property since 1986, Laura said. The remodels were not only unauthorized, they were funded through a second loan obtained without her consent, and Michelle Reynolds is not, nor has she ever been, listed on the deed. Brian's affidavit was the next blow. The court clerk read aloud, I, Brian Reynolds, affirm that the property was gifted to me by my mother in 2023 following her surgery as an act of gratitude and long-term inheritance planning. Nancy didn't flinch. Laura stood again. We have emails, text messages, and financial transfers, all showing Nancy's intent to retain ownership and never once discussing a gift. The affidavit is fiction. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have the deed in question? Laura nodded. And a pending quiet title action filed this morning. Judge O'Connor thumbed through the documents in silence. The tension thickened, Michelle whispering furiously into her attorney's sleeve. After a long pause, the judge tapped his pen against the table. Quiet title action will proceed, he said. In the meantime, Brian Reynolds's access is limited to the guest wing and shared kitchen. Michelle, Reynolds has no legal standing to access or remain in the home without express consent. Michelle stood up too fast. What? She snapped. You're taking her side? The bailiff took a step forward. Michelle's voice rose again. She's a manipulative old... Mrs. Reynolds? The judge interrupted coolly. You're done. Nancy didn't blink. She simply stood, gathered her coat, and turned to Laura. As they stepped into the hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing above them, Nancy said quietly but clearly, Now we start. Laura's lips curled into a grim smile. Let's get the locks changed. The locksmith arrived just after sunrise. His van, a dented white Ford with the company name stenciled in fading blue, rolled up the driveway as the first light of morning turned the frost on the lawn to glass. Nancy met him at the front door with her court documents in one hand and a folded note in the other. Deadbolts, she said. All of them. Front, back, garage, and the side gate. And I'll need new codes for the keypad lock. The man nodded, barely glancing up from the clipboard. He didn't ask questions, just did the work. She liked that about him. It took him just under 2 hours. By the end, the locks gleamed with quiet finality. Nancy signed the invoice, tipped him in cash, and handed him a slice of banana bread wrapped in wax paper. Don't eat it in the van, she said. It'll get crumbs in your shifter. He chuckled, tipped his cap, and drove off. Nancy stood at the threshold, keys in her palm. The house was silent, the kind of silence you didn't notice until you realized how long it had been since it was yours. She walked room to room, locking each door from the inside, checking windows, testing the motion sensors. By 9 a.m., every entry point was secure, every vulnerability sealed. The doorbell rang just before 5. Michelle stood on the porch, keys in hand, tote bag slung over her shoulder, sunglasses pushed up like a headband. She jiggled the lock, frowned, tried again. Nancy didn't move from the hallway. Michelle rang the bell. Twice. Then she reached for her phone, clearly preparing a text, when the doorbell camera clicked on. Nancy's voice came through the speaker, clear and calm. You don't live here anymore. Michelle spun, startled. What the hell? Nancy, open the door. You've been removed from the property by court order. You're trespassing. Michelle stepped back, looking around as if trying to find an audience. You're seriously doing this? You're locking me out of my own home? Nancy didn't answer. Michelle's voice cracked. You think you've won, but Brian's gonna call the police. You can't just lock us out. I already spoke to them, Nancy said. And the restraining order's been filed. Your name's not on the deed, Michelle. It never was. Michelle let her hands fall to her sides, slack. Across the street, the Cooper's curtains twitched. Nancy watched from behind the blinds as Michelle paced the porch like a raccoon caught in daylight. Eventually, she sat on the steps, tears smearing her mascara, her phone clutched in a frozen grip. Cars passed. No one stopped. By the time Brian arrived, dusk had settled in. His truck door slammed hard, always did when he was trying to look tougher than he felt. He stormed up the walkway, calling her name like it still held power. "Nancy, open the door! You've gone too far this time." She pressed the camera button again. "I have nothing else to say to you," she said evenly. "Check your email. Your formal eviction notice was sent this morning." Brian held his phone up like a threat. "I'll get a lawyer. You think this is over?" "It's already over," she said. He kicked the welcome mat aside, cursed, and paced the front yard. Michelle remained seated, wiping her face with the back of her hand, like a child who knew the tantrum had failed. Nancy stepped away from the window. Downstairs, she peeled the backing from 3 laminated signs and affixed them neatly to the front-facing windows. "Private property. By owner. Trespassing will be prosecuted." She stood back and looked at the lettering. Clean, bold, unshakable. Then she went upstairs, turned off the front porch light, and closed her bedroom door. The house was hers again. And now it was time to see what they'd do when they couldn't take it back. The house stayed quiet, but the world outside didn't. By Friday, Nancy's inbox was full. Not junk mail, not store coupons, real messages with real names. A neighbor from 2 blocks over had forwarded an article from the Morning Beacon. The headline read, "Elder Homeowner Takes Legal Stand Against Family Exploitation." Below it, a photo of her home, taken from the sidewalk, sat next to a cropped image of Michelle at the courthouse, mid-shout, mouth open, arms flared. The story had already been picked up by a local legal forum. Attorneys weighed in on elder rights, housing fraud, power of attorney misuse. By Sunday, her lawyer Laura sent a link with the subject line, "Might want to listen." It was a local podcast called Civic Circles, hosted by a soft-spoken man named Theo Lennox, who did long-form interviews on local cases no one else gave proper air. Nancy hadn't wanted to say yes, but Laura insisted. "You've already won in court," she said. "Now let's win in daylight." The recording session was held in Theo's home office, an old Victorian converted into a quiet studio that smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Theo offered her a glass of water, let her sit where she liked. "I'm not here to trap you," he said gently. "Just tell your version. People can listen or not, but it'll be yours." Nancy cleared her throat before they started, nerves fluttering like moths inside her chest. When the red light turned on, she spoke slowly, carefully. "I didn't push anyone out," she said. "I gave them a home, and they tried to erase me in it." That line would echo far longer than she expected. By Tuesday morning, the clip had gone semi-viral, at least in the kind of way things spread locally. The HOA group thread lit up. Her church ladies texted with heart emojis. Old friends from high school who hadn't messaged in years sent her words like "proud of you" and "you were always the sharp one." And then came the GoFundMe. It popped up the following evening, created under Michelle's name, but written in third person, like someone else was narrating her victimhood. Displaced couple seeks emergency housing after sudden betrayal by aging parent. After living under the roof of a toxic matriarch, Michelle and Brian were forcibly removed with no resources or stability. This is elder abuse in reverse. Please help. The photo showed Michelle looking distraught, seated on the steps of a house that wasn't hers. The goal was $25,000. It raised $87 before someone in a local Facebook group flagged it. A thread exploded with screenshots from court documents, quotes from Nancy's podcast episode, and even a TikTok from a neighbor's teen daughter who had filmed Michelle sobbing on the porch weeks prior. The fundraiser was taken down within 48 hours. Michelle's Instagram went dark, her Facebook scrubbed. Brian hadn't posted anything in weeks, and now even his LinkedIn was set to private. Nancy didn't gloat. She didn't post memes. She wrote one thing, just one, on a clean white background with no hashtags or filters. "They forgot I was still alive. I remembered." The post racked up over 3,000 shares in 2 days. It wasn't viral, but it was enough. The silence from Brian was the loudest part. That Friday, Nancy and Laura met in the law office again, papers spread across the polished table like war maps. Laura pointed to 2 forms clipped together. "Full deed reversal," she said. "We've got the judge's favor, and the fraud case gives us teeth. Plus, we're filing for financial damages, credit harm, unauthorized debt, reputation smearing, all of it." Nancy nodded. "Do it." Laura hesitated. "You sure you want to go this far?" Nancy met her eyes with something steely. They did. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting golden streaks across the pavement. Nancy gathered her things, took one last sip from the paper cup of tea, and headed for the door. As she reached the hallway, her phone vibrated. Unknown number, 1 new voicemail. She didn't check it, not yet. The email came in just after midnight. Nancy had been sorting a drawer full of light bulbs and loose rubber bands when she noticed the subject line, "Suspicious credit activity. Alert ID, number T, X87942. She frowned and clicked. It was from her bank's fraud detection service. Someone had attempted to open a second line of credit in her name using her Social Security number and home address for $22,000. The request had flagged due to conflicting income reports and the unfamiliar recipient account, a company called Cornerstone Elevate Interiors. Nancy's pulse didn't spike. Her hands didn't shake. She just stood still, reading the email once, twice, then again. And then she opened the file attached. The invoice was nearly identical to the ones Michelle had forgotten on the counter, only this one listed Cornerstone Elevate as the vendor. Nancy remembered the name. Michelle had mentioned her cousin Caleb once offhandedly, while bragging about getting a family rate on tile work. Nancy picked up the phone. First, she called the bank and froze all activity. Then she called the credit bureau and locked her identity profile. Then she called Laura. "You're telling me," Laura said slowly, voice flat with fury, "that Michelle used your Social Security number to take out a loan and routed the money to a relative? That's what I'm telling you. I'll have a fraud claim started by morning. This is beyond civil. We're in criminal territory now." "Good," Nancy replied. "Let's file." By sunrise, police reports were submitted. Laura attached the bank logs, flagged the routing number tied to Caleb's contracting business, and added the previous forged documents to build the pattern of deception. The fraud investigator from the county sheriff's office, Detective Haley Grant, called Nancy the next day. "You did everything right," the woman said. "We've already initiated contact with Michelle Reynolds. She's on our radar now. Might get loud. Just a heads up." Nancy nodded into the phone, then said softly, "I've lived with louder." 3 hours later, her phone lit up with Michelle's name. She let it ring. Then it rang again. Voicemail. The third time, she answered, but said nothing. Michelle's voice was shaky, breathy, the sound of someone trying to cry without permission. "Nancy, listen, please. I didn't know Caleb used your number, I swear. He said the paperwork was just a formality for the discount, that you'd be fine with it. I didn't mean for this to happen. Can we talk? Woman to woman?" Nancy slowly brought the phone down to her lap and pressed end call. Then she opened her contact list, clicked Michelle's name, and selected block caller. The moment felt less like slamming a door and more like sealing a vault. She leaned back in her chair and looked around the room. Her living room, her curtains, her coffee table, still slightly scratched from Brian's boots, but clean now. Heron on the credenza sat a framed photo of her and her husband, taken in Colorado the year before he passed. She picked it up, thumbed the edge, and placed it back down facing outward. The house was silent, not with tension, with peace. For the first time in years, peace. The next day, Nancy received a call from Laura. "You ready for some poetic justice?" she asked. "Always." The detective recorded the call with Michelle. She confessed to knowing the number was yours, said she was doing it for the house, and she named Caleb directly. Will she be arrested? Maybe not yet, but there'll be a paper trail now. Her credit's flagged, her name's in the system, and we're using the confession to bolster your damages claim. Nancy said nothing for a long time. Then, add pain and suffering. Laura chuckled. Already did. Nancy ended the call and walked to the front window. Across the street, a moving van pulled up to the neighbor's place. A young couple climbed out, laughing, keys in hand. The woman looked up, saw Nancy watching, and waved. Nancy lifted a hand in return, slow and steady. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Brian. It had rained the night before, and now the pavement outside shimmered like glass beneath the morning sun. Nancy stood behind the sheer curtain in her living room, her tea steeping in slow spirals, as Brian's pickup rolled to a stop at the curb. He didn't get out right away. Just sat there, hands gripped around the wheel like he was trying to strangle a decision. His shoulders rose and fell with each breath, faster than usual. When he finally stepped onto the sidewalk, his eyes scanned the front of the house, up the eaves, to the sealed gate, to the laminated private property sign still pressed flat against the window. Nancy didn't move, just watched. Brian walked up the front path slowly, almost reverently, like someone visiting a grave. He reached the porch and knocked, not slammed, knocked. Then he stepped back and waited. Nancy sipped her tea. "Mom!" His voice cracked through the morning air. "Open the door, please." Nothing. He shifted from foot to foot. "You've made your point, okay? You locked her out. You humiliated us. But this is still my home too." She set her teacup on the table, wiped her fingers on a cloth napkin, and reached for the security console on the wall. Brian stepped closer to the door. "You're ruining everything," he shouted suddenly, his tone unraveling. "I helped you. I put in time here. I carried you to the bathroom after surgery, remember that? I gave up things to be here." Nancy pressed a single button. Beep. The system chirped twice, and the alarm armed itself with a quiet, final chime. Outside, Brian staggered back a step, blinking like he hadn't expected the rejection to be so mechanical. He stood there for a long moment, breathing heavy. Then he turned, walked back down the steps, didn't look back. Nancy let the curtain fall. She didn't watch him go. Not this time. An hour passed, maybe 2. The house was quiet again, clean and unthreatened, its walls holding space instead of tension. When she stepped outside to water the porch plants, she saw it. Folded neatly under the welcome mat was a piece of notebook paper torn along the top edge. Nancy stared at it for a beat before picking it up. "I was your son before I was anything." The handwriting was unmistakably Brian's, hurried, messy, like he hadn't known what to say until it was already too late. There was no apology, no ask, just a statement left like an unfinished sentence. Nancy didn't cry. She folded the note once, then again, and slid it into her jacket pocket. Later, maybe, she'd decide what to do with it. Right now, she had more important things to hear. The phone rang. Laura. Nancy answered with a quiet, "Yes?" "It's done," Laura said. "Judge signed the quiet title petition this morning. You are the sole and legal owner of the property. No survivorship clauses, no ambiguities. It's yours, Nancy. Just yours." Nancy leaned against the doorway, the cool air brushing her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "You want me to send over the certified copies today?" "Yes, and send one to the trust office. File it under the name we agreed on." Laura paused. "You still want it to go to the nonprofit?" "I do." "All right. Let me know if he shows up again." "He won't," Nancy said. And for the first time, she believed it. She hung up, walked back inside, and unpinned the tea towel from the oven handle. Folded it, smoothed the edges, placed it back in the drawer. Then she pulled out a manila folder, freshly stamped. Inside, her name, her deed, her future. The manila envelope arrived certified, with a crisp green sticker and a barcode like a warning label. Nancy slid it open with the same letter opener she'd used on her husband's retirement party invites, back when paper still meant something. Inside were 26 pages filed from Michelle's attorney, dense with legalese, but one phrase leapt off the second paragraph like a red flag. Petitioner hereby lists partial property interest at 117 White Birch Lane as potential equity source to settle Chapter 11 obligations. Nancy reread the line, then again. Michelle had filed for bankruptcy, and in doing so, she'd dragged Nancy's house, her house, into the debt column like a final act of war. Her jaw clenched, not with panic, with purpose. She walked into her study, turned on the lamp, and called Laura. "She's trying to use the house to cover her debts," Nancy said flatly. There was a pause, the sound of Laura scrolling. Jesus, Laura murmured. She's listing your equity as if she has partial claim. Classic maneuver. She's banking on the court not reading the fine print. She's about to learn I read everything. Give me 3 hours, Laura said. We're filing an emergency motion. Trust protections, asset segregation, the works. We'll keep the house cordoned off and her bankruptcy trustees far away. Nancy didn't ask if it would work. She already knew it would. But that didn't mean it wouldn't leave a mark. By Friday, they were back in court. Michelle didn't show this time, just her lawyer, a different one now, older, quieter, the kind of attorney you hire when you've run out of spectacle and need someone who actually reads footnotes. Laura presented the original title, deed, trust transfer filings, quiet title ruling, and the full list of Michelle's fraudulent actions tied to Nancy's property. It was clinical, relentless, precise. Judge O'Connor took less than 20 minutes to rule. Petitioner Michelle Reynolds has no legal, financial, or fiduciary interest in the aforementioned property at 117 White Birch Lane, he said. All assets listed under the respondent's trust shall remain exempt from bankruptcy proceedings. Nancy exhaled, not relief, but completion. Like the sound a door makes when it clicks into the deadbolt just right, Michelle would now face her creditors alone. Every dollar she borrowed, every check she bounced, every design invoice left unpaid would follow her in her own name. And this house? It was untouchable. That night, the text came in just past 9. Brian, you're tearing us apart. Nancy stared at it, thumb hovering over the reply button. She imagined him sitting somewhere in a dim room, backlit by a muted television, the weight of consequences finally sinking in. Maybe he thought the words still worked. Maybe he believed that under the right combination of guilt and nostalgia, she'd break like she used to. But she didn't break anymore. She typed slowly. Nancy, I'm restoring what you tore. She hit send, blocked his number, closed the phone. No ceremony, just truth. She went to dinner alone, picked a small place 2 towns over, dim lighting, no chance of running into familiar eyes. The hostess offered her a booth or a quiet table by the window. She chose the table, ordered the steak, medium rare, a glass of Merlot. She didn't look at her phone once. Across the restaurant, a couple in their 20s argued softly over appetizers, whisper fighting with the intensity of people who hadn't yet learned that love doesn't erase damage. It just invites you to face it together. Nancy watched them for a moment, then turned back to her meal. When the check came, she paid in cash, tipped well. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the sky was painted in navy and rust, a half moon hanging low like a punctuation mark that hadn't yet decided if it was the end of a sentence or the start of a new one. She pulled her coat tighter, walked to her car. No one waited at the curb, no voices behind her, just the sound of her keys, clicking steady in her hand. The banker didn't ask questions. She was young, barely out of college if Nancy had to guess, and wore her hair in a tight bun, gold studs in her ears, and a cardigan far too warm for June. Nancy handed her the notarized documents one at a time. Remove him as secondary on this checking account. Terminate his access to the insurance policy. He is no longer authorized on file for anything tied to this address. The woman nodded as she clicked through her screen, her voice soft but efficient. And do you have the replacement designee? Nancy pulled a separate envelope from her purse. Inside, a power of attorney form, freshly signed. Maggie Whitfield, she said, my goddaughter. I'd like her listed as sole executor and emergency contact for all future financial and medical directives. The banker smiled faintly. She's a lucky girl. No, Nancy replied. She's a good woman. It took just under 30 minutes. When the banker printed the final summary sheet, she passed it across the counter with a quiet, reverent air. Nancy signed it cleanly. No hesitation, no second thoughts. One signature in, several withdrawn. Back home, the sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors. Nancy kicked off her shoes, walked barefoot through the quiet. She passed the old guest room, the one that had once been hers, back when Brian and Michelle made the master bedroom their own. She stopped, The door was open now, the bed stripped down to fresh white linens. The window was cracked just enough to let the breeze lift the curtain like a breath. She left it alone. Let it stay untouched. Empty, but not abandoned. Peaceful. The next morning she met Maggie at the diner on Hillcrest, the same place her husband used to take her for Saturday breakfasts, the kind with weak coffee, strong bacon, and those paper placemats with the local dentist's ad in the corner. Maggie had dressed up, but not too much, just enough to show respect. Nancy liked that. "I got your paperwork," Maggie said, stirring sugar into her tea. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take care of things if I'm ever too tired to do it myself." Maggie nodded, eyes shining. "You know I will." Nancy pulled a second envelope from her purse, this one labeled Whitfield Fund. Inside, the documents for a scholarship she'd established using part of the equity Michelle had tried to siphon. It was small, but real. Designed for young women over 40 going back to school, women who'd lost something, maybe a marriage, maybe a house, maybe just time, and decided they weren't done yet. Maggie blinked at the name. "You named it after me?" Nancy smiled. "Number I named it after who I want to come after me." They hugged in the parking lot, just briefly. Enough. That afternoon, Nancy went shopping. Nothing extravagant, just one thing. A new armchair. High-backed, firm-cushioned, with a floral pattern in navy and gold that reminded her of the wallpaper her grandmother used to hang in the parlor every spring. It was delivered that evening, placed in the corner by the front window where the light came in best around 4. She sat in it with a glass of iced tea, barefoot, her legs curled under her like she used to when reading old detective novels long before life got noisy. She watched birds hop across the lawn. She didn't think about Brian. Not much. Before bed, she went out front with a small wooden sign she'd had custom made. She drove 2 nails into the top of the fence post, steadily, with care, and hung the plaque just above eye level. White letters on dark pine. Still standing. She stepped back and looked at it, not as a message to anyone else, as a promise to herself. The envelope arrived again. Another motion. Another suit. This time filed by Michelle herself. A countersuit, alleging emotional harassment, unjust enrichment, and undue public defamation resulting in reputational harm and financial distress. Nancy didn't flinch, didn't comment, didn't share. She handed the packet to Laura without opening it. "Do what you need to do," she said, "and don't call me unless it's final." Laura smiled. "You don't have to yell to win, just file." The counterclaim hit the docket less than a week later. Nancy never stepped foot in the courtroom for it. She didn't need to. Laura walked in alone, armed with over 200 pages of compiled evidence, forged loan documents, email threads between Michelle and Caleb, timestamps from bank activity showing withdrawals aligned with Brian's direct deposits. There was no jury, just a judge who had seen the kind of case that relied on performative victimhood and was tired of it. He read through everything without pause, raised an eyebrow once, asked one question about digital signatures. Laura answered calmly. He nodded, then he ruled. Michelle's claim, denied. Cited abuse of process, intentional misrepresentation of facts, and a consistent pattern of self-serving litigation designed to weaponize the court. Her penalty, a formal fine, court-ordered financial monitoring, a freeze on any new credit activity without review. Nancy received the news by text. Just one line, from Laura. "She's done." Nancy stared at the message in the glow of her kitchen light, then powered off her phone and set it beside her mug. No champagne, no dramatic reaction, just a quiet exhale and the echo of footsteps in a house that no longer needed to be defended. By late summer, Nancy's living room no longer felt like a museum of lost battles. The walls had been repainted, sunlight cream with cornflower trim. Her new armchair sat where the morning light struck hardest. On the bookshelf beside it, a glass jar filled with smooth stones, one for every call she'd made, every document she'd signed, every silence she had endured. She didn't keep them for vengeance. She kept them for memory. Her doorbell rang every second Tuesday now, not with lawyers, but with women. Some older, some barely past 40, Some carried boxes of folders, others just nervous smiles and manila envelopes clutched like flotation devices. She made space for all of them. The first meeting of the White Birch Elder Defense Circle was small. 5 women, 1 thermos of chamomile, a tray of lemon bars. Nancy served tea from her mother's porcelain set and passed out printed checklists, what to watch for in property transfers, signs of coercive financial dependence, trusted attorney contacts. By the 3rd month, they'd doubled in size. Someone brought banana muffins. Someone else brought a binder. A retired librarian from across town offered to keep track of resources. Nancy didn't speak much. She didn't have to. They knew why she was there. Her living room, once silenced by shame, had become a room of recovery. Not loud, not bitter, but sure. One evening, as the last guest filtered out and the front door clicked shut, Nancy stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a still warm mug. The house hummed with nothing but the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock. Not a single voice, not a single knock, not a single threat. She walked the length of the hallway, barefoot, until she reached the fireplace. There, above the mantel, sat her framed deed, legally sealed, fully hers. She didn't touch it, just looked. The sound of the kettle whistled behind her. She turned slowly, poured 1 more cup, and from the corner of her eye she noticed something else. A white envelope had been slid through the front door slot. No return address, no name, just her own, handwritten, carefully, deliberately. The envelope sat unopened on the kitchen counter for 2 days. Nancy didn't ignore it. She simply let it wait, like he had made her wait. Months, years, whole seasons of her life gone in the time it took him to remember she was a person, not a plan. On the 3rd morning, she slid it open with the edge of a butter knife. The note inside was short, written in his usual shorthand, no flourishes. I know I don't deserve time, but if you're willing, I'll be at Birchwood Gardens Cafe this Saturday at 11. You don't have to speak. You don't even have to stay. I just want to sit with the woman I used to look up to. No apology, no ask. But it wasn't a demand either. Just a hinge, cracked open. The cafe was tucked between the botanical greenhouse and a row of copper fountains that never ran right. Nancy remembered coming here once, years ago, with her husband for their anniversary. They'd ordered lavender scones and watched a toddler toss breadcrumbs to pigeons with reckless delight. Now it was quieter. The flowers still bloomed, snapdragons and dusty pink peonies lining the patio. A breeze stirred the umbrellas overhead. She spotted him instantly. Brian sat at the far corner table, hands clasped, shoulders drawn in like parentheses. He looked thinner, older, not broken, but no longer full of bluff. Nancy didn't wave. She just walked over and sat down across from him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Brian exhaled and said, "You came." Nancy nodded once. "I read the note." He looked down at his hands. The thumbnail on his right hand was chipped, the cuticles raw. Work hands, or stress, or both. "I don't expect anything," he said. I let her take over, more than I even realized." Nancy stayed still. Let the silence fill the space between his words. She kept saying you'd be fine, that we were building something smarter, more efficient, and I believed her, or maybe I just didn't want to fight. He blinked hard. It was the worst mistake I've made in my life. Nancy studied him, the way his jaw tensed, the way his throat caught on that last sentence. She believed him, but that didn't change anything. "I didn't come here to argue," she said, her voice low, even, "or to grant absolution. I came to make sure you heard this directly." Brian looked up. "There will be no contact moving forward, no visits, no calls, no keys. You will not be listed in my will, not as executor, not as heir." He flinched, but didn't interrupt. "You had every chance," she continued, "but when I needed a son, I got a squatter with entitlement issues and a partner. In fraud." She paused. "I don't hate you, Brian, but I don't trust you, and love, without trust, is just nostalgia." For a moment, he looked like he might speak. Then he stopped, just nodded. "I understand," he said quietly. Nancy stood, placing her cloth napkin gently beside her untouched tea. "You don't have to." She turned and walked away, the wind catching her cardigan just slightly. She didn't look back. Outside the cafe gates, she paused by the entrance to the garden path, letting the scent of hyacinth drift over her. An elderly man with a walker tipped his hat as she passed. She smiled. Somewhere behind her, Brian was still sitting, maybe replaying the conversation, maybe mourning what he thought he'd recover. But Nancy didn't carry that weight for him. She had set it down long ago. She reached the bench near the pond and sat for a moment, took a deep breath. The air was light, crisp, free. She reached into her purse, pulled out her journal, and wrote just one sentence beneath that day's date. "Closure isn't peace handed over, it's peace made by walking away." Then she closed the book and walked on. The recorder clicked on with a soft hiss. Nancy sat in the sunroom, not her armchair this time, but the wooden rocker that faced the hydrangeas near the porch. Across from her, Eliza Moreno, author, journalist, and survivor in her own right, balanced a notebook on her thigh and sipped ginger tea from a ceramic mug that Nancy had chosen deliberately. It read, "Unapologetic." "Take your time," Eliza said. "This isn't about drama, it's about truth." Nancy looked out the window before she answered. A bird landed on the fence, the same one that had watched her hang the still-standing sign a month ago. "I think people assume harm always announces itself," she began, voice steady, almost casual. "Yelling, bruises, slammed doors. But emotional violence, that's polite, it wears manners like gloves." Eliza scribbled something, didn't interrupt. "It sounds like, 'You're lucky we even brought you.' Like, 'Don't make a fuss, she's fine.' It's letting someone move into your house and somehow, without permission, they start naming the rooms." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Eliza's eyes held hers. "And what changed?" Nancy smiled faintly. "They thought I'd go quietly." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. When the book hit shelves 6 months later, it didn't scream on the bestseller lists or debut with a morning show fanfare. But it sold. Bookstores tucked it into their front-facing displays under signs that read, "Real Women, Real Wins." It passed from hand to hand at church groups and legal aid clinics, across desks in aging services offices, and beneath tables in community centers. They thought I'd go quietly, how I took back my home and my voice. Nancy's photo, sharp navy coat, pale eyes unflinching, made the back cover. Her quote sat just below it in italic serif. "They thought I'd go quietly. I wrote this instead." Her porch mailbox overflowed with letters. Some were thank yous, others were confessions. A few were scrawled apologies from women who admitted they hadn't believed someone like Nancy could win. She didn't judge. She knew better than anyone what silence could cost. The next meeting of the White Birch Elder Defense Circle had to be moved to the church basement. Too many chairs for her living room now. A local bakery donated scones. A retired judge asked if he could speak for 10 minutes. Nancy gave him 5. During the break, a woman in a yellow cable-knit sweater approached. "My daughter's in pre-law," she said. "Wants to do something that matters. She asked if there's any way to intern with your lawyer." Nancy sipped her tea. "We don't pass torches here," she said. "We light more." The woman blinked, then smiled like she'd just been given permission to believe in something again. Later that evening, after the final car had pulled away, Nancy sat on her front steps beneath the porch light. It had rained again, and the scent of earth and leaves filled the air. A frog croaked in the gutter. The hydrangeas bowed slightly from the weight of water. Inside, the house was still lit, still warm. She thought briefly of Brian, of Michelle, of the silence that now stretched between them. She did not regret it. She did not miss them. Some severances were sacred. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the smoothest stone from her glass jar, ran her thumb across it once, then walked barefoot across the lawn and placed it beneath the still-standing sign. Not for closure, for continuation. As she straightened, headlights turned slowly into the next driveway, her neighbor returning from night shift. Nancy waved. The driver waved back, then rolled down her window. "My niece started reading your book," the woman said. "Said she wants to study elder law now." Nancy tilted her head, the wind brushing her silver hair back gently. "Good," she said. "We're going to need her." The frame was heavier than she remembered. Nancy held it steady as she stepped back from the nail above the fireplace, tilting the document until the glass caught the light just right. The title, clean, legally sealed hers, sat beneath a matte black mat and gold-beaded trim, centered, permanent. She'd left a blank space on that wall for over a year, not out of neglect, out of intention. Now it was filled. Maggie arrived first that morning, a basket of lemon scones on one arm, and Nancy's will tucked in the other. She wore a loose linen dress and her hair in a braid down her back, her usual blend of modern and old soul. "Want me to read it at the table?" she asked, voice light but respectful. "After the second round of lemonade," Nancy replied. "Let them settle." The guests trickled in, just 12, all invited with handwritten cards. Women from the defense circle, a librarian, her notary, the neighbor from next door who always brought flowers even when no one had died. There was no music, no speeches, only warm light, strong coffee, and the smell of baked peaches rising from the kitchen. Under the oak tree in the backyard, the table was set with blue linen, vintage plates, and mismatched silverware. Nancy poured lemonade from a glass pitcher with slices of Meyer lemon floating like pale suns. The air was thick with the scent of hydrangea and earth and distant cut grass. At the halfway point, Maggie cleared her throat. "I've been asked to read something on behalf of the hostess," she said, unfolding the new will. There were no dramatic pauses, no trembling hands. Maggie's voice was steady, her words paced like rainfall. "All assets within the estate shall transfer to the White Birch Foundation for Elder Rights Advocacy, effective upon the passing of Nancy Elise Reynolds. No claims by relatives, regardless of blood or prior designation, shall override this decision. No mention of Brian, no mention of Michelle, no apologies, no explanations, only direction." Nancy sipped her lemonade and closed her eyes briefly as the breeze picked up. Somewhere in the distance, a blue jay called out and was answered by another. The wind rustled the oak leaves above them, dappling sunlight across the table like blessings falling between branches. When Maggie finished, no one clapped. That had never been the point. Instead, they lifted their glasses in a silent toast. Quiet. Absolute. Nancy raised hers with them. Later, when the plates were scraped clean and the last guest had hugged her goodbye with both arms, Nancy walked slowly to the edge of the lawn, bare feet pressing into damp grass. The armchair, her new one, the navy and gold one, had been moved to the porch. Facing out, not inward, 2 sparrows landed just beyond it, pecking at crumbs left behind by someone's scone. She didn't shoo them away, just watched. She lowered herself into the chair, joints cracking in protest but not pain, a small mercy, earned in time. She folded her hands in her lap, breathed deep. It wasn't joy she felt, not exactly. Joy was loud, fizzing. This was something quieter, older. It was the knowing that the house was hers, that the silence in its rooms was no longer hollow, but holy, that her name wouldn't be erased, forgotten, co-opted or carved out. It would remain. She leaned back slightly, smiled to no one, not out of spite, but sovereignty, and then just under her breath, spoken only to the wind that now moved through the leaves like a witness. He slammed the door. "I opened a future he'll never walk through."